Her Excellency, the Honorable Minister of Agriculture and Member of Parliament, Marcia Chowdhury, BRAC officials and staff, Professor Joachim von Braun, our keynote speaker, who is a director of the Center for Development Research of the University of Bonn, distinguished speakers who have graciously accepted ASAE's invitation to share their thoughts on various development issues related to our theme, fellow economists and participants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. First of all, in behalf of the members of the ASAE Executive Council, I would like to extend my deep gratitude to BRAC for agreeing to co-organize this 8th International Conference of the Asian Society of Agricultural Economists. It has been some time since the association held its now biennial conference in South Asia. Our thanks go to Dr. Mahabub Hussain, the incoming president of the association, who immediately accepted the challenge and responsibility of seeing through this event to this point. I know everyone is impressed with the quality of efforts that went into the preparation for the conference, from the selection of the theme, the venue, the selection of paper contributions, and most important of all, the speakers. The success of the event can be gauged by the number of the profile of participants who are now here. We welcome you all and thank you for your growing interest in strengthening the Asian Society of Agricultural Economists. The association is indeed expanding, and we hope it continues to do so in the years to come. The theme of this 8th International Conference of the Asian Society of Agricultural Economists, Viability of Small Farmers in Asia, is indeed timely and relevant. Timely because the conference supports the Food and Agriculture Organization, or FAO's declaration of 2014 as the International Year of Family Farming. In developing countries, family farming is associated with small farms from which farmers derive a regular and adequate supply of food or an acceptable income and standard of living. This typically involve land holdings of less than 2 hectares and employ minimum labor and capital. The conference theme is also relevant because it provides a venue to revisit and tackle issues related to small farms and their indispensable role in promoting food security, reducing poverty, and enhancing welfare. With your indulgence, allow me to contribute to the discussion or to the discourse on the theme of the conference. I have organized this address in 3 parts. First, I would like to characterize the current profile of agriculture and smallholders and their contribution to growth and poverty reduction. Given this, the relevant question is, to what extent is agricultural growth still the key to rural poverty reduction? And as one principally involved in policy making, the interesting question is, what are the critical policy levers that could make the rural sector growth more pro-poor? Let me first discuss the significance of small farms. Despite their size, the importance of small farms cannot be overlooked. Countries in Asia are among those with overwhelming panorama of small farms. The latest statistics of the World Census of Agriculture reported about 428 million agricultural land holdings in Asia, 90% of which are less than 2 hectares in area. In fact, the average size per land holding is only about 1.6 hectares, ranging from as small as 0.3 hectare in Bangladesh to as big as 3.1 hectares in Pakistan. Because of their share of no less than 80% of agricultural production, the performance of small producers has often been equated with the performance of the agriculture sector as a whole. These small farms are the major sources of raw materials for agribusiness and manufacturing industries. Moreover, agricultural commodities geared for exports are good sources of foreign exchange earnings to finance capital accumulation needed for industrialization. As the economy goes through an industrialization process, agricultural workers, especially during off-planting and harvesting seasons, are often employed in other sectors as contractual or part-time workers. And as agriculture modernizes and links with the industry and services sectors to increase value adding in agricultural production, more remunerative jobs are created. The range of products and services becomes wider and markets expand. Ironically, in Asia, which is home to around 4.4 billion people, including two-thirds of the world's undernourished, majority of people living in poverty rely on these small farms for food. Thus, potentially, further development of the agriculture sector, specifically the small farms that constitute it, could redound to rural welfare improvement and poverty alleviation. Despite the recognition of the role of agriculture, however, what is being contested now is whether agricultural growth continues to be a key contributor to overall economic growth, food security, and poverty reduction. Indeed, the productivity performance of the agriculture sector is now greatly challenged by the changing environment. First, farm holdings have been reduced to more than half their size during the Green Revolution period. Asian farm sizes have also continued to get smaller over time. From the height of the Green Revolution period in the late 1970s, early 1980s to 2000, the average size of agricultural land holding in Bangladesh has decreased from 1.3 hectares to the current recorded average size of 0.3 hectare. The same trend is observed in India, where the average size of land holding went from 2.0 hectares to 1.3 hectares. In the Philippines, it is 2.9 hectares down to 2.0 hectares, and in Thailand, from 3.7 hectares to 3.2 hectares average size. Even in fast-developing countries like South Korea, average land holding decreased from 2.1 hectares in 1960 to 1.1 hectares, based on the most recent report. It is also well known that while average farm sizes are being reduced, these farms continue to support large households. Population in the rural areas of South and Southeast Asia continued to increase by an average of about 157 million from the turn of the century to the present, although the average annual rate of growth has significantly slowed down as compared to the past decades. This diminution of farms has been eroding the efficiency and the capacity of the small producers to generate surpluses or even just to sustain their expanding households. Second, the yield growth in agriculture sector has slowed down with the overexploitation of production resources, particularly the groundwater resources, and the intensive use of energy and inputs such as fertilizer and pesticides, which have resulted in higher operational costs. Current technology has already been exhausted, while game-changing technologies akin to the Green Revolution in the 1970s and 1980s are yet to take place to revitalize the agriculture sector. Third, investment in agriculture has been below par the investment in manufacturing or industry. Even investment from governments have been on the downtrend in the past 2 or 3 decades, thus affecting the development of rural infrastructure like roads and bridges, provision and improvement of modern post-harvest and other market facilities, and strengthening research, training, and extension, to name a few. Access to the needed credit by small farmers from formal institutions like banks has continued to be difficult in most of these countries because of the risky nature of the farming business. The most critical challenges, however, relate to the changes in the global market, characterized primarily by rapid urbanization, globalization of trade, and dwindling prices of commodities in the international market. And as if these are not enough, there is also the pressure of changing climatic conditions that has increasingly threatened further growth in productivity. Recognizing these challenges, we now examine the extent to which agricultural growth contributes to rural welfare improvement and poverty reduction. Many studies at the country and subnational levels suggest that the role of non-agricultural growth is increasingly becoming the main driver of welfare improvement and poverty reduction. The reduction of rural poverty in Indonesia in recent years was mainly due to non-agricultural rather than agricultural growth. Most, if not all, of micro-level studies in the Philippines have made the same conclusion. Recent country estimates of growth elasticity of poverty reduction, conditioned on income shares, show that a 1 percentage point increase in non-agricultural income leads to greater reduction in rural poverty compared to a scenario where such an increase happens in agricultural income. However, the extent to which growth, whether in agriculture or non-agriculture, reduces poverty crucially depends on the degree of openness of the economy and the increase in the flow of goods and services across sectors or regions. The degree of openness or ease of commerce that influences growth elasticity estimates varies across areas, across provinces in the case of the Philippines. And this elasticity depends largely on the initial state of infrastructure, intraprovincial income inequality, and human capital endowments, to name the more significant ones. In other words, growth translates into poverty reduction more where infrastructure is good, where there is less income inequality, and where people are well educated and skilled. Much of this is intuitive. Better farm-to-market roads and other common facilities, for example, allow the poor to gain access to markets. Better infrastructure could increase the rates of return to investment of development efforts, which in turn could increase employment opportunities, indirectly benefiting the poor. In contrast, greater initial inequality in the distribution of income or wealth is likely to hamper the pro-poor nature of subsequent growth. The relatively high elasticity of poverty reduction with respect to agricultural growth in China, for example, seems to be in part due to the relatively low inequality in land distribution. In the Philippine context, earlier micro-level studies suggest that the successful implementation of land reform in some regions, like the Central Luzon region during the early 1970s, had similar positive impacts on the effectiveness of non-farm sector growth in reducing rural poverty. The quality of human capital among the population is also an important determinant or determining factor of pro-poor growth. Better initial human capital endowment enhances the ability of a country to take advantage of new interventions that can facilitate rural growth and reduce poverty. India's achievement of relatively high level of literacy rate in 1960 to 1994 contributed significantly to the reduction of poverty. Improvements in nutrition and health likewise contribute to pro-poor growth. A distinctively Philippine phenomenon is the increasing role played by overseas Filipino workers, or OFWs, in making growth more pro-poor. The large initial stock of OFWs tends to enhance the pro-poor growth nature of subsequent rural growth, as remittances from OFWs are invested in small-scale businesses. These include local convenience stores, local public transportation using a motorcycle with a sidecar that can hold 4 to 5 people, or even small-scale money-lending businesses, which may potentially relax credit constraints among the rural poor. Moreover, the critical role played by technologies like the modern rice varieties during the Green Revolution period should not be overlooked. Such technologies led to rapid increases in farm incomes, part of which were invested in children's education, that allowed these children to benefit from the expansion of the employment opportunities in the non-agricultural sector. In view of this, there is much room for improving agricultural productivity, particularly in areas that may be remote or isolated but endowed with natural environments favorable to agriculture. Focusing agricultural investments in such areas would likely yield high payoffs in terms of reducing rural poverty. Let me now discuss the policies that will allow smallholders to contribute to growth that reduces poverty. Note that smallholders are not a homogeneous group. Some of them have the potentials to improve their production performance and be transformed into commercially oriented and profitable farming systems. These smallholder farmers need a policy environment that would support and nurture this transformation and help them overcome the challenges they face. To further develop the initial conditions that would facilitate fruitful growth, policy levers in 3 areas are recommended. First and foremost of these are interventions that would improve farm productivity, especially in areas where topography is not conducive to agriculture. These productivity-enhancing interventions may include greater access to new technologies and farm management practices by enhancing research and extension, stronger links to input and output markets through investment in rural infrastructure, development of irrigation facilities, access to capital credit and innovative insurance schemes, and enhance efforts in capacity building and training. In Asia, where non-agricultural growth has been contributing to poverty reduction, policy interventions should focus on facilitating the linkage of smallholders to supply chains and markets. Many small farmers, due to their resource endowments, good location, or sheer entrepreneurial skill, are succeeding as commercial farm entrepreneurs, though only on a part-time basis. These smallholders can be supported through innovative institutional arrangements such as contract farming, producers association, and the like. This would help increase farmers' bargaining power and access to markets, allow them to obtain technical assistance and information on market demand, and lower their transaction cost and price risk. The private sector must also be given incentive to link more with small farmers. Another area of concern is the pressing need to overcome the threat of climate change. Smallholder agriculture has to adapt to and mitigate the impact of climate change. Interventions with high potentials and that are increasingly becoming important over time include investments in adaptation to help farmers improve land management, adjust their planting dates, and introduce new crop varieties. They also include investments in mitigation to help farmers improve their energy efficiency, raise crop yields, and manage their land in ways that increase carbon storage. Let me end by saying that the role of agricultural performance in reducing rural poverty may be less clear today than it was during the Green Revolution period. Nonetheless, there remain areas for policy interventions that can strengthen smallholders' agricultural performance, for them to continue their role as backbone of rural economies and key vehicle for more rapid poverty reduction. The increasing complexity and diversity of the environment in which smallholders now exist would not warrant a single policy, but rather a mix of interventions that considers the aforementioned factors. What's important is that interventions holistically address the needs of the poor in the agricultural sector and expands opportunities for smallholders to take part in the growth process. Thank you and good day to everyone.